I think one of the most important things about leadership is taking ownership. If you want to succeed, you got to take ownership of every part of your business, right? That's what it really comes down to. And I think that's where ownership and curiosity together is a powerful marriage, right? Because then you start questioning things and say, okay, this is something that I have to find a solution for. I can see I have a problem here. Now I got to go figure out the solution. That's really what the businesses that I've been in, the leaders that I've worked with that have done really well, that's what they do. They take ownership and they're curious. They want to keep growing. They want to try to find better ways to do it.
You're listening to RevOps Champions, a podcast created for B2B leaders to help you align your people, streamline your processes, trust your data, and leverage technology in order to grow your business. Torben Rytt, thank you so much for being here with me today on the RevOps Champions podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We've moved in sort of similar circles for at least the last 13 years that I have been in Minneapolis, but we've never really had the opportunity to work together directly. So I'm really happy to have you on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and same here. And yeah, I've been here for 14 years, so we must have gotten here around the same time.
Right. We left Europe, so we were living in Spain for 5 years before we moved to Minneapolis. And of course, what drove us here is a combination of, well, and I think there might be some crossover here, but it was ultimately love and my wife, because this is where our family was based. But it was also because the Spanish economy was really trashed after the 2008 crisis, and it just wasn't recovering. Whereas, in the US, it was bouncing back pretty well. So it was a really good move for us.
Right. The same story here. My wife was from here, and she imported me, and it ended up being a great business opportunity as well. So yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah, and I must say, I was blown away by the business community here, and the fact that you're in the middle of the US, which of course makes it so accessible to grow a business, both nationally and internationally, right?
Yeah, I definitely think it's a wildly underrated part of the country in terms of doing business here. I think there's a lot of really good benefits to being here, both in terms of access to affordable talent.
Agreed.
And also, like you mentioned, like being in the middle of the country, connectivity, both in terms of time zones and things like that. It's really it's been very good to me in my career to be here in Minneapolis. So I'm thankful for it.
Yeah. The folks that know you from your success with Siteimprove, which was essentially your first gig, after moving to the US.
Yeah.
And then I guess more recently, Gainbox is kind of what you've been working on now for I don't know how long.
Yeah, a year and a half now, 2 years. Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay. So as we go, feel free to jump around between the two. I'm right now very intrigued by Gainbox because I also recently noticed that Gainbox integrates with HubSpot in addition to Salesforce.
It does.
So I'd love to dig more into that. Thinking back to some of your previous roles, and you've had a lot of different roles in as you've grown your career and your success, what were the key elements that separated the teams that scaled more efficiently than the ones who didn't?
I think one of the things that we always did really well at Siteimprove, and that we were very intentional about, was collecting data and using data. We were very fortunate that our founder and owner of until we sold the business in 2020, when he started the company back in 2003, he had been an Oracle consultant. That was what he knew. And he built the systems that were actually used in Siteimprove up until we implemented Salesforce in 2018 or something like that. So they were used for most of the journey that I was on with Siteimprove. And the beautiful thing about that was that he had really thought through all of the data collection and how that was going to work. So we had the same data sets going back to the very, very beginning of the business. And of course, we expanded on them over time, but it all lived in the same database. And it was really a gift to us that we could go back and then find the data from the very, very first attempts that were made to reach companies in Denmark and then in the UK and so forth, and have all that data in one place. So I would say that was one thing that we saw again and again, that both in terms of the reps that were good at using the information they were given, the sales leaders are good at digesting it, and then the most important part, of course, operationalize it, actually put it into action, actually using the data to drive the team forward. I would say those were the two main things, like really understanding how to get the data, analyzing the data, and using it to then drive decisions, and then operationalizing it, actually making it possible for the teams to use it. And I think we had a really big advantage, especially in the earlier days of Siteimprove, where we had a homegrown CRM, and I would spend all my evenings just sit there and program features for the reps. So when they came to work the next day, they could use the data that we have found to be impactful, right? So that was a huge part of our agility, that we could sit and do those things literally on the fly. And I don't know if I would recommend that to everybody, but for us, it really worked because we could move very, very quickly. And we did do a lot of experimenting. Like we would try things, and we would have some that worked and some that didn't. But just having a constant mode of experimentation was very, very helpful on our journey as well.
I mean, that's really interesting, because it's, again, you're not the first person on the show to talk about the importance of data. But I love that you started with data, because it is such a critical component. But we do know that it's only one of the components, whether you look at it from a RevOps perspective or from a business operating system perspective. Data is always in there, right?
Uh-huh.
And I think, to your point, some businesses do a better job of using, well, first of all, collecting the right data, but then more importantly, using that data to make data-driven decisions. Why would you say, at Siteimprove, and I'm guessing you're probably bringing this same sort of culture, for the lack of giving away my next question, to Gainbox? Because to be very data-driven in an organization, there's got to be a foundational, whether it comes from leadership or culture, whatever you want to call that. What do you think that was at Siteimprove that you were so data-driven?
I think it was a curiosity. We wanted to know, like, what was it? Like, it would drive me and luckily the people around me, because I think we did a really good job of getting curious people on the team, would drive us nuts. And we would have these like one-off successes. Like we would have companies that would buy and they would upgrade and they would do all these things, but they don't fit our ICP. Why are they so successful with the product? And then we have these ones that we think should look just like them, and they canceled after the first year. We would have like so many of those questions that we just wanted to answer. And then you would look at the data at first glance, you say, there's no pattern there. And it's okay, well, there's gotta be. So then you realize, okay, maybe we don't have the right data. You have to go out and get new data. And I think that's where a lot of companies get stuck. They stay in that box, and this is what we have. We analyzed it 100 different ways. We can't figure it out. Where I think you have to be curious. You have to go and say, okay, but what other data points are out there? Even if we can't find anything that points where it says like, that's it, that's exactly it. Can we find indicators that start hinting towards what it might be? So we did a lot of that, like going out, broadening our search for data, and then narrowing it back down again, broadening, narrowing. We would keep doing that over and over again. So we started seeing these patterns form and say, okay, now we're starting to understand why these companies are successful and why these are not. Now let's try to figure out, where do we find more of these companies? And then at first frustrating and then relief. Part of it was that you would look at them, but they're in all these different industries, until you realize, well, the industries didn't have anything to do with it. I had to stop thinking about targets as being in industries. We had to start looking at their use cases. How are they using it? Why are they using it? What do their customers have in common, since they need this? And that was kind of the biggest piece for us, was like really understanding how to find the next customer that was likely to convert, or the next prospect that was likely to convert. And I think that's hugely underrated. And now we are getting into, of course, why I found Gainbox, because that's the thing that drives me nuts. So we spend so much time optimizing our pipeline. We introduce new sales methodologies. We do all these things, sales training, pipeline monitoring. We do deal desk. We do all these things once it's in the pipeline, but companies spend very, very few resources compared to what I think they should on making sure that it's the right accounts that they start in the very beginning. Like, who are your BDRs, SDRs calling? Who is it that we're trying to hit with our marketing efforts? Like, do we actually know truly what it is to be a good customer? And do we have data to back up those assumptions? Because usually they're just made on a whiteboard by a small team and then put in a PowerPoint that this is the ICP we're going to go after. I think that is very backwards.
Yeah. So essentially, Torben, what you're saying is like what you realized at Siteimprove was it was almost like the psychographic. You were learning psychographically more about your ideal customers, your ICP, and it was that sort of curiosity and that where they were looking for the same thing that you were looking, which was the importance of being a data-driven business. And like you said, you're now essentially building, by the sound of it, Gainbox with a very similar mentality and culture.
Exactly. And I think it's good timing. I think there are some things that we can do now again. I mean, truly what I'm doing with Gainbox is building the tool that I wish I had back then, right? When I would sit long evenings, long nights, and over the weekends and try to figure these things out. What you need to do good data discovery is infrastructure that lets you do it. If you have to sit and go into every system and export a CSV file and then build a model in Power BI. You have to do this over and over again. And all of a sudden, a new data point needs to be included. I've got to just start all over again. The model breaks. You can do it. It's time consuming and it's tedious work. And it means that it's a very, very small part of the business who can do it. And the people you need to do this might not be the people who have those technical skills. You might need to get more creative people and people who think differently than developers to actually be able to do these things.
And that wouldn't be scalable either, is your point.
It is not scalable. It's not scalable at all. And I think it's very inefficient and it's very limiting and it doesn't have to be. Plus, in recent years with everything that's happening with AI, if we have new tools that we've never had before and where there are certainly lots of talks in the markets about how you can use it to target more people. You can have all your emails be personalized. You can do all these things. You set up more and more emails. You can have AE BDRs that call for you. You can do all these things. I think it's just a race to the bottom. We're all going to ignore all of these channels and we're going to find ways to just block all this nonsense because it is nonsense. If something costs you less than a cent to do, it doesn't have any value. Like at some point, it's just going to be watered out. No one's going to pay attention to it. Really, it's a shame that that's how we're kind of the first wave of AI tools is going about it. We're trying to say, instead of trying to just blast things out to more people, what if we try to narrow the scope and say, who are the people that truly need our solution? The people who are more likely to care about what we do. And then let's have humans connect with them. Then let's spend the time to say, you as a prospect are worth more than 10% email to me. I'm actually going to go out and make a human connection because I think you need what I have to show you. I think that's the future.
Yeah. So again, it comes back to the ICP of who do you want to be a hero to? You cannot be a hero to everybody. So we talked about the importance of data, why you were finding customers at Siteimprove who weren't your ICP, but they had the same curiosity that you were hoping your ICP would have. And now you start talking about infrastructure, because obviously data without, somewhere to manage it, of course, makes it pretty much unusable, correct?
Right.
And we're seeing this every day now with our CRM implementations. And I know HubSpot well. Of course, Gainbox integrates with HubSpot as well as Salesforce. And as those platforms are building AI functionality into their platforms, our clients and our joint customers, in many cases with mostly HubSpot, but in some cases with Salesforce as well, they're saying, well, what do we need to do to be ready to use AI? And of course, when you start doing AI readiness assessments, the very first thing is, well, what does your data look like? So I know I'm speaking to the choir here, but data is becoming even more important now than it was 10 years ago. And you built a very successful business, as did many others, around the importance of data. And with AI, do you also believe that, the importance of data is just becoming that much greater?
Absolutely. I mean, if you're not collecting, it's the same as what we had before, just amplified, right? As we get, as we grow more reliant on AI and automation, the importance of our data just goes up, right? It really does. The other thing that what I'm hoping will happen kind of as the next wave of this is like what we did up until this point was we went out and we enriched. I'm sure you see this when you get your clients and you look and they have hundreds of fields in their existing CRM of all the different things that they have enriched over the years from all the different sources. They tried Zoom info, they tried Apollo, they tried all the different providers, right? And they all gave them some data points that they thought were interesting at the time. Then they switched. Now they have it from somewhere else in a slightly different format. Now the sales have to try to remember which ones do I look at for what? How do we filter it and all this stuff? So we also we've collected all this data and the result has been a ton of clutter that has actually, instead of speeding us up, has slowed us down because now it's a huge mess. We have all these accounts in there that probably shouldn't be in there anymore. And then a lot of them went out of business and others were probably never interesting, but they were on a list that we imported 5 years ago. So you have all this clutter in there. And that's one of the things with Gainbox where we say, well, if you start being able to assign a value to you, not how interested they are in us or in any of that, how interested are we in them as a business to every account in your CRM? And you know which data points you use to do that. Then you start being able to paint this picture of, okay, which accounts do we need and which fields do we actually need? So once we've done that, well, then you can start figuring out if we just purge it or whatever you would do. And then moving forward, instead of us having people do what they do now, which is whenever they get a new data list or whatever, they create new fields, they import it in. We're having people do that into Gainbox instead. And what I really like about that concept is instead of the Salesforce being both your workbench and where you do business, let's separate the two. You have a workbench being, in this case, Gainbox. That's where you do all your data discovery. That's where you import all the lists. Which I don't know if this is a good list, but I want to find out. Mm-hmm. Once you figure out of that entire list, like who are the leads you actually want to do something with, then let's push those over to your CRM. So we want to take the CRM and put it up on a pedestal a little bit and say, this is something we need to protect. It needs to be a pristine environment where salespeople can be productive. Mm-hmm. All the data discovery that I think is so very important is also very messy. So let's keep that out of the environment and do that somewhere else. And that's one of the things that I think Gainbox is going to be very helpful to people to have that way of doing it and splitting those two up.
Interesting. Because that was actually going to be my next question is, why are your customers, current and future Gainbox customers, why are they integrating with Gainbox? In other words, they're using either Salesforce or HubSpot. What are the 1, 2, 3 driving reasons for integrating Gainbox with their CRM?
I mean, the whole concept, Gainbox wouldn't work without it. Like Gainbox is a two-way system, right? Because we need to understand what you have tried in all your accounts. So we get that from your CRM, all the activity data, all the accounts, all the stuff that you already have enriched them with. And then we bring that into Gainbox and then we connect it with other data sources. And the one that has been really interesting has been to use AI to make sense of first party data. So for example, website content, like how are they talking about themselves? Who are they marketing to? What kind of products do they have? Like all these questions that before was answered through manual research where the reps would sit and go through it account by account. A lot of that can be done by AI. Of course, there are examples of things where that data just doesn't exist there, but then we're starting for signals. Are there things that could hint that this might be the case? And if we can triangulate it with a couple of those, sometimes we can actually get really good results. But we need to know if we have good results. And that's where the data from the CRM comes in, because then we can start doing back testing up against your existing or your past performance in each of these segments, so that we can start saying, okay, if we look for this signal, what was our win rate on the ones that had this signal versus the ones that who didn't? And then what's very important when you do these kind of analysis is, of course, to be careful of large averages. Because you can say, well, yes, that's true in one vertical, but in a different vertical is not true. Or if you slice the data a little differently, then all of a sudden, so you gotta So that's one of the things that we do a lot of when we do the implementation process with our customers. We help them through this process of figuring out what are all the different signals that we could be listening for, and could they have a double meaning? Like could it be something where in one part of your market it's a good thing, in a different market it might not be a good thing? We need to map all that out. But to do that long-winded answer to your question, we need that two-way street so that we can get all the information out. We can add real world data to it, analyze it, and then we put all that complexity into a single, for example, a grade. Let's say we want to grade all the accounts in terms of how good of a fit they are for a specific use case. And push that use case fit back to the CRM so that when your reps need to find it, that's all they need to know is that one field is how I figure that out. When you balance your territories, you just have that one field you add to your territory report. When you want to know your pipeline account mix, that's how you do it. So that's the beauty of it. Complexity stays in Gainbox. The very end result, the grade or whatever it is we produce, we put that back in the CRM, and then that's all you have to care about there.
Really, it sounds very attractive. Torben, so the AI component that you mentioned, is Gainbox using AI to sort of essentially enrich the data before pushing it back into CRM, or are you using your customers' AI?
We have our own, we call them AI research agents. So as soon as we connect to a CRM, we start crawling the websites of every account that they have in there. And that tells us a ton of interesting information. Even before we get to the AI part, it tells us if the domain is redirecting, maybe they were acquired, maybe they rebranded, like all those kind of things where it's frustrating for the reps when they come in and the accounts don't work. So just doing that is actually a really helpful exercise, but that also means we get all this content on the website. And then we can spin up these agents in Gainbox that go out and then look for whatever specific information you want. And the fun part here is you can get really, really specific. And we can't take much credit for the tools. We're just really happy with the way that we can actually use them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we can use any AI platform that people prefer. We do most with OpenAI because they have some really good and cheap models for this. But the kind of things that you can find that we have, we were talking to a company the other day who produce laboratory equipment for dairies.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a product where it was really easy to swap something about like when you put these into production, either it's liquid or it's solid, and to switch between the two with the competitor was really difficult. So for them, they wanted to find all the ones who produce milk and ice cream and cream cheese. If they had those three, that was the golden ticket for them, right? But how do you find all of those in the entire country? That is one of those tasks that will take us probably half an hour, and we'll give you the answer across hundreds of thousands of dairies. So getting in and being able to answer those kind of questions really fast at first seems like, okay, but when you start to operationalize it and say, okay, that means now we can target them specifically and say, you are a really good fit for our product because you have this exact product mix.
Mm-hmm.
This is why it's good for you to look at us. You get really specific in your marketing, and that's a huge win.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm thinking of already multiple examples of conversations that I've been in just in the last 3 or 4 months where that scenario has come up. Like if only we could find the combination of those 2 or 3 different customers or types of products or solutions that we provide for, but we're not able to find it.
Right.
It's just too difficult, too complicated to find that data. So you've essentially, your team, you've built your own resource agents that go and do very specific tasks.
Everything we've done with this is meant to be done at scale, right? So we're not going to try to be another list builder. We're not going to try, there are companies like Clay and others where you can go and you can make these lists and stuff. We're not trying to make lists. We're trying to map out entire markets. So when we do this, we spin up 400 agents, for example, and we can plow through 100,000 accounts in about half an hour. And that's the kind of speed you need so that you can say, okay, is this relevant? Because now we can start asking these really specific questions. And then we back test and say, out of the ones that look like this, what was our close rate compared to the ones that look like this? And you need that kind of speed. So it's not something where now we got to go out and do a month-long research project to try to figure out all these data points. Where can we buy the list and then put it in? If you really want creative exploration, you need speed.
Yes, absolutely. Everything's going to become more and more about better and faster, right? If you can only do better but not faster, you're not going to be able to compete.
No.
Really interesting. What is your ICP for Gainbox?
So the ICP for Gainbox is really, we found that the benefits multiply as the company grows. Like the more reps this can help, obviously, the bigger the impact. But also most companies will start out and have good success in a couple of clearly defined niches, if you will, right? Where it's, okay, we know who they are. Those are the ones we're going to go after. But then most companies will hit a ceiling at some point where say, okay, now that the niche or the couple of niches that got us started are starting to dry out. Now we need to go into a broader marketing motion and broader TTM motion that is different, right? And that's when it gets hard. And that's where we excel, like helping them figure out, how do we find those next opportunity pockets? How do we map out a larger market and understand where we should be playing and where we shouldn't? So to answer your question, we found it to be any less than 10 reps, then you have a pretty good handle on it already. North of 25 reps, and it starts to really, really get interesting. And so I would say like in that 10 to 100 rep space is usually where we're the best fit.
Okay. What do companies that have, 150 or 200 or, 1,000 reps, what solutions do they have?
Most of them will have basically just really complex Power BI solutions set up. So then they get into that space, right? And then they have teams where that's what they do.
Very expensive teams.
Very expensive teams. And we're a young company. I think someday we can also help them quite a bit.
Sure.
For now, we're gonna focus more on that mid market and say, okay, that's where we can really help people who might not have a full blown, most of them will probably have some sort of a RevOps team. Or in fact, all of the ones we have talked to now have, but what they have in common is they're incredibly busy. So they say, this sounds great, but we don't have the resources. Like, yes, we would love to sit and have time to do all this analysis and then figure all this out, but we have all these other priorities. And I think that's one that's really interesting to me, is that people recognize it, but is that finding the time. And I think the biggest part there is it is very time consuming to do it the way it has been done in the past.
Absolutely.
So that's, again, why Gainbox is such a help, because we not only does the platform itself help, but we also come in as consultants, and we don't come in and say, okay, now what would you like? We come in and own the project. So we'll sit down with them and say, okay, what are we trying to achieve? What are we thinking we're going to get out of it? And then we're the ones who own the project and meet with all the different stakeholders and include the different departments and all that stuff to make sure we have buy-in at the end of it. So a really fun and robust process for that.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, actually, because I wanted to make sure we clarified that. And I wasn't even thinking about it. You're essentially more of a services company that just happens to have a very powerful set of tools that you use to do the work that your consultants then essentially work with your clients. So they're clients, not customers.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a really interesting model.
We have customers who have logged into Gainbox maybe once or twice.
Oh, okay.
Because we do all the exploration for them. So they've hired us to sit and do that exploration, and they use it every day, but they do that, in this case, in Salesforce, where they sit and work with the output that we give them.
Oh, that's really interesting. Okay. I like that. So essentially, yeah, you're empowering your team of consultants to be able to help and provide more value for more of your clients, because you now have this very robust tech platform with the agents and what have you, who can essentially do a lot of the heavy lifting, but then your team can interpret for every client specifically custom to them how they should use that data to essentially grow their business.
Exactly.
Wow. Very cool. Very, very interesting. We kind of just went very organically, which of course makes sense, because it's as we talked about, having data without a technology platform or infrastructure, as you refer to it, a tech stack. So we haven't really talked too much about the tech stack, because maybe it doesn't really matter what the tech stack looks like. But I think ultimately what you're saying is the tech stack is a very critical piece of, having the data be exceptionally useful and in a very fast way.
Yes.
So that the leaders of your clients can make the best decisions. And it sounds like you're focused very much on the sales side of the business, right? So your ICP ultimately is the reps whose jobs are, and their lives are being made easier every day because they now have so much more intel about their prospective clients, or maybe in many cases, maybe their existing clients.
Correct. Our customers are and will be the companies who are worried about the sales efficiency in their outbound motion. That's really what it is. Because what we help them with is be intelligent in how they target. So it really is that outbound motion of going out and saying, okay, this is who we're going to go after. You can use this in ABM as well, right?
I was just thinking it almost sounds like maybe even a replacement to ABM, but I'm glad you're saying that this is really just a new and a better way of doing ABM.
It is a way to do intelligent targeting for ABM, right? So it's all those different use cases for say, okay, we want to focus in on a specific target. What we're saying is, so the way I see it is that today, kind of the traditional ways we go out and say, okay, we want to set up a target or a territory depending on the situation, right? And we go out and say, okay, how do we filter this? We say, okay, we want maybe these industries. Okay, so now we're down here, right? And so, okay, now we want them to be this big, then we're down here. And there might be a couple of other things. And then depending on what you sell, you might have some technographic you filter by, or some other of these more generic filters. The problem is that when then the rep starts working these, the first thing they do is they click it and they go into the website, and then they start looking and say, okay, do I think this is a good account? Right? And I think that's the problem that we say, do I think it's a good account? It becomes very much a personal preference.
Yeah, it becomes subjective instead of objective.
It's very subjective, right? Yeah. And time consuming, because now we start doing that. So when they sit down in the morning and say, okay, who am I going to start working today? The first thing to do is start clicking through a list. And that wouldn't be so bad if that list was really good. So 9 out of 10, they would say, yes. Now I just got to get familiar with this one. I got to figure out my plan of attack and go after it. But when it's 2 out of 10 and they start saying no, 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 well, then we wasted a ton of time. And when we don't know that number, is it 2 out of 10? Is it 4 out of 10? Like, how many of those accounts are actually good accounts? We don't even know how they're being judged. Then it becomes really hard to plan, like territory planning without those insights is really, really difficult. Anyway, so by using something like Gainbox to do all that research up front and at scale, now we can all of a sudden say, okay, yes, we might have those first filters. They might have changed because we've learned better ways to filter, but we can get a smaller pool of companies that we push to the individual reps or to the ABM campaigns and say, now we have a much higher likelihood of whatever you touch being a good fit, and thereby increasing the sales efficiency. And then also it's the business who's in control, not the individual reps making decisions. Now we learn as a team, we grow as a team, and we start knowing the quality of what we put into the pipeline.
Yeah. No, I mean, which again, I'm already starting to think, how will the ideal rep at a particular company look different in the future to what they are now? Because they won't have to do the amount of thinking that they've been doing, even just to know who to contact next, because it's all being done for them. It's like all they need to do is sit down at whatever time they start in the morning, because they can now trust the data that's being presented to them and saying, yeah, okay, here are the next 10 calls. I'm not even going to think about whether I should call number one. And, I might still go and look at their website but AI is probably going to help them do all that as well pretty quickly. So all they need to do is just read the brief, make the call, and then move on to the next one. There's no time wasted on thinking.
The way that I actually think this is going to help, because you could see it that way, but I actually think what's going to happen is that you free them up to do more strategic thinking. So instead of saying,
absolutely,
should I be calling these? Now all of a sudden you can say, you're still going to spend time. I don't I have never had success with salespeople who just call off of a list like a robot, right? Then we might as well just use robots. So what I would love to see is that reps use this to get more strategic, to level up and be more strategic in their thinking and say, okay, now I have an account here. I don't have to spend time deciding if it's good or bad. What I do have to do is make a solid game plan and understand how does my product that I'm selling, how would that fit into their world and why would they care? And there's, of course, all kinds of things as we start being able to group these. It's going to be more of the same story. But I think it's really important that the salespeople take that ownership and say, okay, I'm the pilot here. I got to figure out how to drive this deal home, right? That starts with strategic thinking on how we're going to approach them. What we're doing is freeing that time up for them.
Yeah. So back to the ICP, your Gainbox ICP, it sounds like B2B. Is that correct?
Correct.
Have you sort of narrowed your target any more than B2B companies with 10 to 100 reps?
Where we excel, and we're going through the exact same exercise. We're helping all our customers. We don't have very much data yet, but we are excelling when people have hard to find niches. Like when it's hard for them to define it, then that's when we become that much more helpful, right? If what you're doing already works, if you truly can sell to everybody who's in manufacturing and has more than 500 employees, great. Then we're not going to help you a whole lot, right? But if you need to find the manufacturing companies that do specific kind of product or they target it to a specific audience, well, then that's when we can start helping you. We're working with a learning management system right now where they want to find all the companies where they offer very specific types of educational offerings, right? So they want to find all the ones who have certifications. They want to find all the ones who do continued learning and those kind of things, right? And again, you can't go buy that list anywhere, but using this, we've been able to then map out the entire market for them and say, okay, these are the ones that offer the type of education you have. Then we can layer the values that they talk about on their website. Is curiosity important to this company? Is like all these different things that typically are good indicators that someone would invest in education for their employees or for their customers or whatever it might be. So by looking at, and with that, we have looked at hundreds of different like not something we just took off a list somewhere, but hundreds of specific things we sat with them and discussed and tried out and say, okay, are these interesting signals for us to look at, run it through, look at the data, and then we can say, okay, out of all of these, here's a handful that actually are really meaningful that have a strong correlation. Those are the ones we use to model.
Very interesting. I'm also thinking about something that in response to the question I asked you earlier about companies that are using Salesforce or HubSpot as their CRM, who are then bringing in Gainbox because of the value that Gainbox provides. There was something that you were just saying now that kind of made me think on that question of like, take a company that has 25 or 50 reps, they use HubSpot as their CRM. Was there anything in addition to what you've already shared as to why they would want to bring Gainbox in?
Everybody we've talked to so far have tried this and failed, or at least not seen the success they wanted to see. I mean, there's been lead scores. HubSpot introduced that years and years and years ago. That there's been these different concepts out there. ICP is certainly decades old, right? Like, there's been this. I mean, the concept of figuring out who to target is not new by any means. Everybody has tried all kinds of different ways to do it. A lot of these projects that people have run didn't really succeed, and it comes down to a couple of very logical things. One, they look too broad. They use whatever filters they had available to them at the time and in their systems, and they tried to do it by that. And it was way too broad. It didn't really make any difference. Or they went way too narrow and said, now we only want the ones who look like this, and this, and this, and this. And then it got so narrow that, yes, you might have had a couple of hundred accounts that looked like that, but you had 100,000 had no idea where they fell in the spectrum, right? So I think the reason that things got so simplified was because that was what was feasible. Because if you sat and you had to do this in Power BI, and you had to do all these crazy calculations to figure it out, well, that's great. Now you have a Power BI file that has all the answers, but how do you use it? How do you then, whenever a new account comes in, run it through that same model, and then get the result back. So very, very like technical things have been holding people back, that you couldn't actually make these systems in a way where it was nuanced enough to add value. And often it wasn't tested against your historical data. I mean, if we didn't, there's so many ideas that we have and that customers bring to us where we say, that sounds great. That's perfect. Let's try it. And then we look at the data and go, actually, that didn't make any difference at all, or actually showed the opposite, right? So that ability to backtest it is something that people haven't had, or at least it was very time consuming. And then of course the operationalizing it, right? So my point being that people have tried in the past, and a lot of people haven't seen what they were hoping to see from the efforts because of some very specific reasons that we have overcome. And I think the way that people think about it also needs some change. Like people think of these account scores as being linear. A lot of times it's from a percentage, from 0 to 100. Anybody tries to tell you that you should rank your accounts on a scale from 0 to 100, talk to someone else, because that's not the reality. Like there's factors to it, right? Let's say you have 3 teams. You have an SMB team, a mid-market team, and an enterprise team. Well, we can't, if we just have that scale, we don't know which ones we should give to who. So one of the things we do a lot with Gainbox is we call that matrix. So a scale or a size and fit matrix where we say, okay, what are the different parameters that might tell us something about how big of a deal we get with this customer? And that's one thing. So then we optimize that model. So one of the things we do there is we say, okay, there's 2 things to it. How big of an opportunity, so kind of the size of opportunity, and then the fit. Because you might have someone that actually really needs your product, but it's going to be a smaller deal. You might want to give that to one team and then have some that are a great fit, but an enterprise deal, and have that go to a different team. So being able to be more nuanced in how you look at it is going to help you be successful with it. Because if you try to dumb it down to something where you can put it into one field and it's percentage from 0 to 100, you're going to have a really hard time actually having that be an impact.
Yeah, especially if you have that complexity in that example you gave of where a sales team has SMB reps, mid-market reps and enterprise reps. I mean, they're going to need different information, different data, different intel.
Yeah. Or maybe you have different products, right? Maybe you have different products that need different audience. And I mean, there's all kinds of complexity that can go into it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because this is both a strategic decision, the folks that you're working with and then that are buying the Gainbox services, they're strategic leaders, even though the true beneficiaries, which then of course obviously impacts the whole business, are the reps whose lives and work becomes that much more interesting because they're spending more of their time doing strategic thinking versus all this research that they currently do without a product or a service like Gainbox. What are you seeing currently, and what do you see into the future? Do you think that the folks that you're going to be working with on your customer side are going to be the RevOps team? Is it sales ops? Is it who are the folks that you're working with most closely, who can be doing all the messy work, as you say, within Gainbox that is then feeded back into the CRM?
So usually our champions would be RevOps, right? They're the ones who have been tasked with this to find a solution. The decision maker is typically the CRO, who says, okay, we need to improve our sales efficiency. How do we do that? It's been stagnant or it's dropping. We need to improve that. And this is a really good place to then at least start by looking and say, okay, do we have an issue here? Do we actually know who we target and why? Would be the first thing, right? But then once we get started and we start having everything set up and ready for them, RevOps are going to be the ones we work with to keep, like, in terms of operationalizing it. But it's very often product marketing who has really good input to who are they building the product for? How are they thinking about the ICP for the different parts of the product? And what signals do they think could be interesting? So it's actually a really cool thing that happens there, that all of a sudden you have these, the product marketers who do not have access to Power BI, who do not have access to the data typically. They all of a sudden have a way to come at and say, hey, could we try to look at this? And could we do a session where we try to run through these things? And that's how we love to work. And that's how why we built Gainbox the way we did. We want to be able to have these sessions where people bring ideas, say, would this be interesting? And then as we sit in the meeting, we get the answer, and then we can decide if that's something that should move into a model or not.
Wow. Yeah. Very cool. Torben, I know we've blown through the time here a lot faster, and because you're so humble, you didn't talk much about the things that come before. I asked you, why were you successful, and what differentiates the teams and businesses that you've worked with over the years, whether they were customers or your own. I'm guessing the precursor to the data and technology components that we've been talking about now for the last 45 minutes are only really possible if you have strong leadership. Would you agree?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah. I sort of make sure that I mentioned that because I think maybe that is, table stakes, I guess. If you want to scale better than your competitors or better than whatever benchmark you use, I think leadership is pretty much is table stakes.
It is. And I'll expand on a little bit more because I think one of the most important things about leadership is taking ownership. If you want to succeed, you got to take ownership of every part of your business, right? That's what it really comes down to. And I think that's where ownership and curiosity together is a powerful marriage, right? Because then you start questioning things and say, okay, this is something that I have to find a solution for. I can see I have a problem here. Now I got to go figure out the solution. That's really what the businesses that I've been in, the leaders that I've worked with that have done really well, that's what they do. They take ownership and they're curious. They want to keep growing. They want to try to find better ways to do it.
Yeah, that's awesome. To wrap up, Torben, thanks so much again for being with me today. What advice would you give to, let's just say, a company or RevOps leader today, knowing all the things that you're working on and what's coming down the line from a data and technology perspective? Do you have any advice for our audience?
We're in a really exciting time right now. There's a lot of products coming out, Gainbox being one of them, but there's just a lot of things happening. And I think we have to be open-minded as GTM leaders right now and explore. But I also think it's going to be really important that we understand our brand and kind of the values of the company and use that to guide how we use all this technology that's coming out. Are we okay with trying to use this to reach more people, potentially creating more noise in everybody's inboxes and phones and whatnot? Or is that not something that's and I think that's something most brands who do outbound struggle with already. Like, how much should we be emailing? Is it too much and all that stuff? And it's something where it's a fine balance. Now all of a sudden everybody has nukes and everybody's got to sort of figure out, okay, how do we harness all this power that we now have? There's not going to be a right or a wrong. I think it's just going to be up to each individual brand to try to figure out what makes the most sense for them in the way that they want to reach their audience.
Yeah. Which I guess ultimately it's always leadership. That's the one thing that never changes in leadership, right? I mean, leadership is about making decisions, which essentially is what you're saying is just make the decisions that you think are right for the future of your business, which of course means also the future of your customers, right?
Correct.
Yeah. No, really good. Torben, thanks again so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I definitely look forward to following the success of Gainbox more and more closely now that I know more about it.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Did you enjoy this episode?
Find more at RevOpsChampions.com.